January 31, 1968. Saigon. 3 in the morning. Explosions rip across the city. The U.S. Embassy compound, the most fortified American building in South Vietnam, is breached. Over 100 cities hit simultaneously. 84,000 communist fighters pouring through streets that American commanders swore were pacified. The strongest military on Earth, blindsided in the largest coordinated assault of the entire Vietnam War. Inside Time magazine's Saigon bureau, one journalist begins writing. He knows details no reporter should know. Which targets were hit, in what order, why those installations, those bridges, those checkpoints were chosen, and not others. He knows because weeks earlier, he helped scout those same targets, cruising past American military checkpoints with the head of communist intelligence sitting beside him, mapping approach routes in broad daylight. His name is Pham Xuan An. For 20 years, he operated inside America's premier news magazine. He attended classified military briefings. He befriended the CIA director. His intelligence reports went to 2 readers, Ho Chi Minh and General Giap. And when the decisive moment arrived, he didn't just report the war. He rewrote how America understood it. Not with a rifle, with a byline. How did one spy, working from a newsroom, engineer the narrative collapse that made the United States lose the Vietnam War? And what did the country he won it for do to their greatest weapon when it was over? The 1950s. The Communist Party has a problem they can see a decade away. War with America is coming. Guerrillas can fight soldiers in the jungle. Tunnels can survive carpet bombing. But the strategists in Hanoi understand something most revolutionary movements miss entirely. You don't defeat a democracy on the battlefield alone. You defeat it in the space between what the public believes and what's actually happening on the ground. And somebody needs to get inside that space. Not a soldier. Not a diplomat. Someone who can embed himself inside the institutions where Americans construct their understanding of reality and relay every detail straight back to Hanoi. They choose a teenage courier named Pham Xuan An. And the decision they make reveals just how far ahead they're planning. They don't train him as a spy first. They train him as a journalist. His cover won't be a disguise he puts on and takes off. It'll be a genuine career, built from the ground up over years with real skills, real credentials, real colleagues who trust him because he's genuinely talented. The spy and the journalist won't be separate identities. They'll be the same person. Here's where it gets dangerous. They send him to America on a scholarship, arranged through the Asia Foundation by Colonel Edward Lansdale, one of the CIA's legendary Cold War operatives, the man who ran counterinsurgency programs across Southeast Asia. Think about what that means. The CIA is paying for the education of the spy who will help defeat them. Lansdale personally facilitates the creation of his own future adversary. The enemy doesn't just build the weapon. They fund the materials, they assemble it themselves, they hand it back sharpened, and studies journalism at Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, California. He interns at the Sacramento Bee, covering local government beats, learning how American newsrooms operate from the inside. Who edits what, how headlines get chosen, which stories make front pages, and why. He eats at diners, watches baseball on Saturday afternoons, chain smokes, lucky strikes, a habit he'll carry until the day he dies. He breeds German shepherds, a passion that will follow him back to Saigon and never leave. He makes American friends, real ones, people he genuinely cares about, people whose lives he'll risk his own safety to protect decades later, when everything falls apart. He spends 2 years living as an American college student, so thoroughly embedded that colleagues will later say he thinks like an American. That's not a defect in the operation. That is the operation. Through all of it, he absorbs something no intelligence academy can teach. How Americans process doubt. How they argue about war. How a single news broadcast can shift the public against a conflict overnight. America's free press isn't just a feature of its democracy, it's a structural vulnerability. A door that swings open from the inside, and An is mapping exactly how to push it. He returns to Saigon in 1960, and what happens next shows you how a cover becomes a career, becomes a weapon. Reuters hires him first. Wire service credibility, proof he can file under deadline pressure, and doesn't just take notes. He breaks stories. He beats Western reporters to source confirmations. He files cables so crisp that editors in London start requesting him by name. The New York Herald Tribune picks him up next. Now he's reporting for American editors who trust his judgment on the ground, building the kind of access that money can't buy and intelligence agencies can't fabricate. Each promotion brings deeper trust, more powerful sources willing to confide over drinks. Then, in 1965, the appointment that changes the trajectory of the entire war. Time magazine makes Pham Xuan An the first Vietnamese person ever named a full staff correspondent at a major American news organization. Not a stringer, not a local fixer paid by the story, full staff, a salary, a desk, and a byline reaching millions of American readers every week. That byline is the weapon. Time's Saigon Bureau isn't just a newsroom. It's the nerve center of how the Western world understands the Vietnam War. Every influential American journalist in the country passes through those doors. And An's reputation, precise analysis, unmatched local contacts, stories that consistently prove accurate, earns him something even Hanoi couldn't have arranged: an invitation to off-the-record U.S. military briefings. The closed sessions where American commanders reveal troop deployments, strategic timelines, and operational plans to a small circle of journalists they trust with their careers. The enemy is inside America's war room, and nobody suspects a thing. His colleagues call him indispensable, the best-connected reporter in Saigon. Generals confide in him. CIA officers treat him as a friend. The last president of South Vietnam personally asks for his analysis. But here's what nobody in that war room understands. Every handshake is a transaction. Every confidence shared over whiskey is intelligence filed in invisible ink, and walks a tightrope every single day. One careless phrase in the wrong language. One document left visible on his desk a second too long. One colleague noticing him lingering near a briefing map after the room is cleared. The margin between Pulitzer Prize and firing squad is measured in glances, and access to classified war plans is only the beginning of what this man can do. What happens when that intelligence reaches the enemy's supreme command and starts killing Americans on the battlefield? And doesn't steal intelligence. He doesn't break into offices at night or photograph classified files from locked cabinets. He doesn't need to. The information flows to him freely, handed over by people who consider him a trusted colleague, a friend. Wartime Saigon runs on relationships. Journalists, military officers, diplomats, and intelligence operatives circulate through the same tight world. The Continental Hotel bar, embassy cocktail parties, the off-the-record dinners where real assessments get shared after the cameras leave. An sits at the center of all of it. CIA Director William Colby considers him a reliable source of local insight and shares analysis over drinks. Colonel Edward Lansdale, the same CIA legend who arranged An's American education years earlier, treats him as an intellectual equal and discusses strategy openly. The era's decorated American war correspondents trade stories and sources with him over French coffee. South Vietnamese generals discuss battlefield assessments in his presence without a second thought. Everyone trusted him, because he'd earned that trust honestly, through journalism that was genuinely excellent. What he hears at those cocktail parties, what he reads in classified briefings, what generals confess over whiskey at 2 a.m, Imoa. He sends into the jungle, and every transmission is a death sentence waiting to happen. The invisible ink could smear. The courier could be stopped at a checkpoint. A single roll of film found inside a spring roll means not just Anne's execution, but the unraveling of an intelligence network that took a decade to build. The tradecraft is almost absurdly low-tech for a spy of his importance. He writes intelligence assessments in invisible ink on thin tissue paper. He photographs sensitive documents and hides the film canisters inside egg rolls and spring rolls, packed alongside real food and parcels that couriers carry out of the city on motorbikes, dead drops along jungle trails, hand-to-hand transfers through a network of intermediaries who never know each other's names. The reports travel up a chain until they reach the only two people in North Vietnam authorized to read them, Ho Chi Minh and General Giap, the supreme political leader and the supreme military commander, receiving the complete American strategic picture from a journalist sitting inside the system that creates it. Troop deployment plans, internal political debates about escalation, projected timelines for operations, assessments of South Vietnamese military weakness. Everything. General Giap's reported reaction after reading Anne's early intelligence was 5 words: "We are now in the U.S. war room." Not a metaphor, an operational fact. North Vietnam doesn't just know what America plans to do. They understand how America thinks about what it plans to do. The internal arguments, the political constraints, the pressure points. The difference is devastating. January 1963. The Battle of Ap Bac Viet Cong forces spring a devastating ambush on South Vietnamese troops and their American advisors in the Mekong Delta. The engagement exposes fatal weaknesses in how the South Vietnamese military operates under American guidance: timid commanders, poor coordination, over-reliance on helicopter mobility that the Viet Cong have learned to counter. The first helicopters drop into the landing zone and walk straight into prepared machine gun fire. Rotors shatter, fuselages crumple into rice paddies, 5 helicopters shot down, 3 American advisors killed, 8 wounded. Numbers that seem small against the scale of the war, but they represent a psychological earthquake. American blood spilled in serious combat for one of the first times in the conflict. The battle makes front-page news across the United States. It proves the Viet Cong can fight American-backed forces and win. Anne's intelligence reports had provided Hanoi with specific details about American advisory methods, how helicopter assault tactics worked, where landing zones were typically selected, and what the South Vietnamese chain of command looked like from the inside. His dispatches cataloged the friction between American advisors who pushed for aggressive action and South Vietnamese commanders who avoided contact. At Ap Bac, the Viet Cong exploited exactly those weaknesses. They anticipated the helicopter approach routes, pre-positioned machine guns to cover the landing zones, and counted on South Vietnamese officers to freeze under pressure rather than maneuver. Anne didn't plan the ambush, but the X-ray of the American war machine he'd been sending to Hanoi for years, its tactics, its dependencies, its fracture lines, gave the commanders who did plan it an understanding no battlefield reconnaissance alone could provide. The journalist whose intelligence helped arm the enemy's understanding walks back to his desk and writes the story for the Western press. Sit with that for a moment. The same man whose reports fed the enemy's strategic picture, that man files the story for Time. He reports on destruction his intelligence helped enable. His coverage is praised for its accuracy and insight. Both jobs done with professional excellence. Nobody sees a contradiction because, to them, there isn't one. He's just the best reporter in Saigon, doing what he always does, and has proven he can influence the strategic landscape. His intelligence changes the enemy's understanding of American operations, feeding a picture that produces real casualties, real helicopters burning in real rice paddies. But changing individual engagements isn't enough. The Americans respond to every setback with more troops, more planes, more billions. To make America actually lose, Anne can't just change what happens on the battlefield. He needs to change how America sees the battlefield. In late 1967, Hanoi gives him that chance. by asking him to help plan the boldest military operation of the entire conflict. Late 1967. Hanoi is planning something no army has attempted in the history of this conflict. A massive simultaneous assault on every major city in South Vietnam, military bases, government buildings, police stations, the U.S. Embassy itself, the Tet Offensive. They need their best man on the ground to scout targets inside the capital. An is paired with Tu Cang, the head of communist intelligence operations in the south. Their mission? Drive through Saigon and identify specific attack points, approach routes, guard rotations, structural vulnerabilities. The logistics of this are so surreal they sound invented. A Time magazine staff correspondent and the head of enemy intelligence sitting side by side in Anne's rattling Renault, cruising past American military checkpoints in broad daylight. Tu Cang, whose pistols will one day sit in glass cases at Hanoi's Museum of Military Intelligence, guides Anne through the target list methodically. Embassy approach from the northeast, radio station accessible through this alley. Presidential palace gate rotation shifts at these hours. They survey the U.S. Embassy perimeter, counting the guards, timing the gate rotations, noting sight lines at military installations, evaluating approach routes to government buildings, measuring distances, timing patrols, marking blind spots. But every checkpoint is a coin flip. One MP who recognizes Tu Cang's face from a wanted poster. One random vehicle search that turns up the hand-drawn target maps tucked beneath the passenger seat. Anne grips the steering wheel a little tighter each time a soldier waves them forward, his smile never flickering, his pulse telling a different story. American MPs wave them through without a second glance. Why would they stop a Time journalist out for a drive with a friend? They spend hours on this reconnaissance. Two men casually planning the biggest attack of the entire war from the front seat of a French sedan, while thousands of American soldiers patrol the streets around them, and takes the intelligence back to his desk. He studies the complete operational plan, the full scope of what Hanoi intends to launch. Then he does something that separates him from a courier. He sends an urgent strategic assessment to Hanoi. This offensive will fail. The southern population will not rise up. Communist infrastructure in the cities is too weak to sustain prolonged combat. American firepower will recapture every target within days. The Viet Cong will be slaughtered. He lays out the reasoning with the same analytical precision that makes his Time reporting so valued. Specific, methodical, devastating in its clarity. Hanoi's response. They use every piece of target intelligence and provided. They ignore every word of his strategic warning. Anne sits with this for weeks. His commanders are sending tens of thousands of fighters into an operation he's told them will be a bloodbath. He helped select the targets they'll attack and die trying to hold. There's nothing he can do to stop it. But somewhere in those weeks, Anne grasps something that transforms his understanding of the entire war. Not something Hanoi told him, something he sees because he spent 20 years studying how America works from the inside. For months, American generals have been telling the press and the public that the war is nearly won, that the communists are on the verge of collapse, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Anne knows the offensive will be a military disaster. But he also knows what happens when 84,000 fighters pour into every major city at once, when the symbol of American power in Saigon is breached on live television. Every reassurance the Pentagon ever issued becomes a lie. Every optimistic briefing exposed as fantasy. The shock won't come from military casualties. It'll come from the collision between American promises and American television screens. In a democracy, that collision is more lethal than any weapon ever manufactured, and has spent 20 years studying exactly how it works. He's watched single broadcasts shift public opinion overnight. He's mapped the fracture lines between what Washington says and what Americans believe. And now he's staring at an offensive that will crack those fracture lines wide open. Not because it succeeds, but precisely because it fails. the attack is designed to lose a battle and understands it will win the war. January 31st, 1968, 3 in the morning. The Tet Offensive begins. The assault unfolds exactly as planned and exactly as predicted. Communist forces penetrate the embassy grounds. Gunfire erupts in provinces Pentagon briefings had written off as secured. Television cameras broadcast chaos that contradicts every official assurance of the past 2 years. Within days, every position will be recaptured. The communists will be slaughtered. An was right about both halves of his prediction, the military failure and the narrative earthquake. Because what happens next won't be decided in the jungle. It'll be decided in the newsroom where An is sitting, surrounded by influential journalists from every major outlet, all of them turning to the same man for context. The military reality comes into focus within days. Every city is recaptured. Communist forces are crushed in urban fighting they were never equipped to sustain. The Viet Cong, the guerrilla army that fought in the South for over a decade, are functionally destroyed as a fighting force. More than half the fighters deployed in the offensive are killed or captured, and himself will later acknowledge the truth plainly. The offensive destroyed the Viet Cong as a fighting force. His own words, confirming that the biggest attack of the war was a military disaster for his side, and yet it won the war. By every battlefield metric, Tet is an American victory, but the war is no longer being measured on the battlefield. It's being measured in American living rooms, on television screens showing footage that directly contradicts everything military commanders have been saying for months. And from his desk at Time, Pham Xuan An shapes how the journalists around him interpret what just happened. He doesn't fabricate stories. He doesn't invent atrocities or manufacture quotes. What he does is far more effective, and it plays out in specific documented moments, and writes analytical cables to Time's New York editors, detailed assessments that shape what appears in the magazine's pages. His reporting argues that the offensive exposed a fundamental disconnect between official military optimism and the reality on the ground. Time's February 9th, 1968, issue lands on newsstands with Tet coverage that reaches millions of American readers. The magazine's own internal files show An's cables feeding directly into that coverage. His framing dominates, not a failed enemy gamble, but proof that the war effort has been built on false promises. Meanwhile, in the Saigon bureau itself, An works the room. A correspondent drafts a paragraph about the embassy breach. An leans over, steers him toward the symbolism. "They got inside," he says. "Forget that they died. They got inside. If they can hit the embassy, what does that say about everything we've been told?" Another reporter files a piece heavy on communist casualty figures and provides context over coffee that reframes the numbers entirely. The dead don't matter if the North can replace every fighter from a population of 20 million. He supplies the quote a correspondent needs, the anecdote that reshapes a leady, the local source who confirms the angle An has already suggested. One Time colleague later recalled that An's analysis became the lens through which we all saw the offensive. He isn't dictating anyone's copy. He's building the frame they write inside. And because every correspondent in Saigon has relied on An as their indispensable Vietnamese source for years, because he has been right consistently when official sources were wrong, his interpretation carries a weight that no single article or broadcast could achieve alone. The fingerprints show up in the coverage. Peter Braystrup, in his exhaustive 1977 study, Big Story, a 1,400-page dissection of how the American press covered Tet, documented exactly this phenomenon. The Saigon press corps overwhelmingly framed the offensive as a disaster for the United States, despite the military outcome. Braystrup traced how a small number of influential voices in Saigon shaped the interpretive consensus that spread through the New York Times, the Washington Post, and every wire service dispatch that week. He didn't name An. Nobody knew An's role yet, but the pattern Braystrup mapped is precisely the one An was engineering from the inside. Now here's what makes An's role decisive rather than incidental. The Pentagon's own years of dishonest optimism had already built the bomb. American generals who insisted the war was nearly won had packed the explosive and wired the detonator themselves. The credibility gap existed before and ever typed a word about it. But a bomb without someone to light the fuse is just potential energy, and ensured that the press corps interpreted Tet not as a costly enemy gamble that failed militarily, but as proof that the American government had been lying. Both interpretations contained truth, and made sure only one of them dominated the headlines. He didn't create the credibility crisis, he weaponized it. The cascade unfolds faster than anyone in Washington anticipates. Walter Cronkite, called the most trusted man in America, travels to Vietnam, sees the aftermath, and goes on national television to declare the war a stalemate. Johnson's approval rating crashes from 48% to 36%. Public support for the war collapses from 40% to 26%. Anti-war protests escalate to a scale that shakes the foundations of the political system. Lyndon Johnson withdraws from the next presidential election. Peace talks begin. The strongest military in history didn't lose a battle, it lost a story. And An, sitting at his desk in the Time Bureau, surrounded by colleagues who still call him the best reporter in Saigon, knows he's just pulled off the most devastating intelligence operation of the 20th century. He changed how a superpower understood its own war. Not with a rifle, with a byline, but the spy who rewrote history can't stop. There are 7 more years of double life ahead. 7 years of filing stories for Time while hiding film in spring rolls, drinking with CIA officers who still call him a friend, living between 2 worlds that are grinding toward a collision. And those worlds are actively trying to kill each other around him. In 1972, a South Vietnamese intelligence officer pulls an aside at a cocktail party. "We know there's a mole in the press corps," he says. "Help us find him." And smiles, lights a lucky strike, and offers 3 names. All clean journalists he knows will survive the scrutiny. The investigation burns through 6 months chasing ghosts, while An continues filing reports to both sides from his desk at Time. Months later, a closer call. A captured Viet Cong courier breaks under interrogation and gives up a name, not An's, but his handler's. The handler vanishes into the jungle before South Vietnamese police can close the net, and spends 3 sleepless nights burning documents in his garden, the smoke mixing with the jasmine while his German shepherds pace the fence line. One more link in the chain, one more interrogation session, and the trail leads to his front door. The chain holds. But the margin is razor thin now, and what waits at the end of those 7 years is nothing he ever anticipated. April 1975. Saigon is falling. North Vietnamese tanks roll toward the city. American helicopters scramble from embassy rooftops, rotors chopping through humid air thick with smoke. And Pham Xuan An, the spy who helped make this moment inevitable, does something that defies every expectation of what a victorious agent should do. He saves Americans, his colleagues at Time, his friends at other news bureaus, Vietnamese associates who face execution the moment those tanks roll in, and works the phones, pulls every favor he has left on both sides, burns contacts he spent decades building. He arranges helicopter seats for journalists scrambling to get out. He persuades American officials to add Vietnamese allies to outbound flights, people who will be shot if they stay behind. He gets his own wife and 4 children onto a plane bound for the United States. He stays behind, and what comes next is the cruelest turn in the entire story. The communists, the people enslaved for over 2 decades, the side whose war he helped win, decide he can't be trusted. 20 years living among Americans, drinking with CIA directors, earning a Time salary, chain-smoking Lucky Strikes, breeding German shepherds in his Saigon garden, cracking jokes in perfect colloquial English. His cover had worked too well. He'd become too American. They put him under house arrest. Then a re-education camp, the regime's term for political prison, the place where enemies of the state go to be broken. Their greatest spy, the man who helped deliver their victory, caged by his own people because the mask he wore for 20 years had fused to his face. The agent whose name meant hidden had hidden so thoroughly that the side who sent him no longer believed he was truly theirs. Eventually, the government acknowledges his service. He's promoted to brigadier general, one of only 2 intelligence officers in the country's history to ever reach that rank. He receives 16 military medals. His Renault and 2 Kang's pistols are placed in the Museum of Military Intelligence in Hanoi, but he's denied exit visas for the rest of his life. He can never return to the America he knew as a young man, the country where he ate at diners, watched baseball, made friends he still thinks about decades later. His family comes back from Washington to be with him. He lives on a modest government pension in a country that both celebrated and imprisoned him. When An's American colleagues finally learn the truth, that their most trusted friend was an enemy agent for 20 years, their reaction defies everything you'd expect. They don't denounce him. They don't call for trials or retribution. Stanley Carnow, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of the war, still calls him a friend. Robert Sam Anson, the American journalist whose life and physically saved during the conflict, writes words that stop you cold. To you, the bravest man I have ever met, I owe a debt that can never be repaid. The people he deceived mourned him. The people he served imprisoned him. Nobody got the ending the story promised them. And himself, near the end of his life, offered one sentence that reframes everything he'd done and everything he'd sacrificed. If I had known we would just be trading the Americans for the Russians, I'd have stuck with the Americans. Pham Xuan An's name means hidden in Vietnamese. He stayed hidden for 20 years inside America's premier news magazine, hidden inside classified briefings, hidden inside the confidence of CIA directors and generals who called him friend. And when the war ended, and the hiding should have stopped, he remained hidden still, from the communists who thought they controlled him, from the Americans who thought they knew him, and perhaps most of all, from himself. He didn't betray anyone. He was loyal to everyone. And that's why nobody, not the Americans, not the communists, not even An himself, got the ending they wanted. If you're enjoying this story, there's another spy who lived a double life even more dangerous than An's, except he did it inside North Korea for 6 years. That video is on screen now.